All right, let's get into it. To really understand the New Deal, you have to picture a nation that's just on its knees. The Great Depression had slammed the brakes on the entire country, and people were absolutely desperate. To pull out of that nosedive, the government had to do something it had never done before. It had to completely reinvent itself. And that's the massive question staring President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the face back in 1933. How do you fix a broken nation? It's the question that really frames everything we're about to talk about. This unbelievable challenge of rebuilding a country from the inside out. Now, before we go any further, let's just get one thing straight because this is a huge misconception. The New Deal did not, on its own, end the Great Depression. It didn't. What it did do was stabilize the country, give people hope again, and totally rewire the relationship between the American people and their government. The economic boom that truly ended the Depression, that was World War II. So the real legacy of the New Deal, it was about transformation. To get a handle on this whole thing, you got to look at FDR's famous 3 Rs. The very first one was relief. And you can think of this as basically triage, like an emergency room for an entire country. Millions were jobless, people were hungry. This wasn't about fancy economic theories. This was about stopping the bleeding, right now. A perfect example of this is the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. And this program was just brilliant. It took a whole generation of unemployed young men, got them out of the cities, and put them to work out in nature. They were planting billions of trees, fighting forest fires, building the national parks we still enjoy today. And all the while, they were sending a paycheck back home to their families. So it gave them a job, but it also gave them a purpose. And it was widespread, with special projects on tribal lands and even in Puerto Rico. And then you had something that was frankly even more radical, the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. This wasn't just about creating jobs. It was about totally reshaping an entire region. The federal government came in and built this huge network of dams to stop the devastating floods and, get this, generate cheap electricity for one of the poorest areas in America. And this is where things got really explosive politically speaking. The government was now a power company, directly competing with private businesses. That was a massive expansion of federal power. Okay, so that brings us to the second R, recovery. Now that the immediate crisis was being managed, the next step was to try and get the whole economic engine of the country running again. And let me tell you, this led to some of the most ambitious and controversial programs of the whole era. At the center of this was the National Recovery Administration, the NRA. The big idea here was to stop what they called destructive competition. You know, that race to the bottom where companies keep slashing wages and prices just to stay afloat and everybody loses. So the NRA got whole industries to agree on codes that set minimum wages, fair prices, and maximum work hours. And crucially, a little piece of it, Section 7A, guaranteed workers the right to form unions. It was a huge deal for the labor movement. For a little while, anyway. The Supreme Court eventually killed it, calling it a massive government overreach. Now, the farm sector was in its own death spiral, which led to the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The logic here was, well, it was wild and super controversial. To get crop prices back up from rock bottom, the government literally paid farmers not to plant crops. Yes, you heard that right. They were reducing the food supply at a time when people were starving. But the thinking was they had to get rid of these enormous crop surpluses that were making it impossible for any farmer to make a living. So after relief and the attempt at recovery, we get to the third and final R, reform. And you could argue this is the most important one of all, because this is about creating the permanent systems designed to make sure a disaster like the Great Depression could never, ever happen again. To fix the broken financial system, they built 2 pillars that are still holding things up today. First, the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. You've seen the sticker at your bank. It insures your deposits. This one thing, almost overnight, ended the panic and the bank runs. Second, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. This was basically the new cop on the beat for Wall Street, created to regulate the stock market and stop the kind of fraud and crazy speculation that caused the crash in '29. And then came the big one, the Social Security Act of 1935. This was absolutely revolutionary. It was the first time the federal government ever committed to a permanent social safety net for its citizens. It created a pension system for when you retire, a system for unemployment insurance, and aid for the most vulnerable people in society. This act is the bedrock of the modern American welfare state. But you really can't understand Social Security without knowing the political pressure cooker FDR was in. He had these really popular, really radical movements breathing down his neck. You had guys like Senator Huey Long with his Share Our Wealth program, which basically wanted to cap fortunes and give the money to everybody else. So you can see Social Security, as groundbreaking as it was, as also a kind of moderate, middle-of-the-road solution designed to stop those more radical ideas from taking over. And that really shows you, right? The New Deal wasn't something everybody just happily agreed on. It faced brutal opposition. And the fights over these programs are what really defined its legacy and honestly shaped American politics for the rest of the century. And this lays it out perfectly. FDR was fighting a war on two fronts. From the left, you had critics saying the New Deal was just a band-aid on capitalism and that it didn't go nearly far enough. From the right, you had powerful business interests who said it was a full-on attack on American liberty, a slide into socialism that was destroying states' rights. All of this conflict was on a collision course with the one institution that could bring the whole thing crashing down, the Supreme Court. This set the stage for an incredible constitutional showdown. So, after the court strikes down some of his biggest programs, FDR gets fed up and he proposes his infamous court packing plan. His idea was to add a new justice for everyone currently over the age of 70, which would let him appoint a bunch of new, friendly judges. Well, the plan blew up in his face. Everyone, including his own party, saw it as a dangerous power grab, and it died in Congress. But then, the strangest thing happened. The court, maybe seeing the writing on the wall, just started changing its mind and upholding New Deal laws. So in the end, FDR lost the battle but totally won the war. And the whole thing got a great nickname that summed it all up. It was called the switch in time that saved nine. The court bent just enough so it wouldn't break. Politically, the legacy of all these fights was just immense. The New Deal created one of the most powerful political alliances in American history. They called it the New Deal Coalition, and it was this incredible mix of groups that didn't always see eye to eye. Southern whites, immigrants in the cities, factory workers, farmers, and, this is key, African Americans, all brought together under one tent by the economic promise of these programs. And that shift was absolutely seismic. I mean, look at this. Before the New Deal, African Americans voted overwhelmingly for the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. But the real, tangible help they got from New Deal programs caused a historic realignment. They switched their allegiance to the Democratic Party, and that alliance would define politics for generations. So, as we wrap up, the whole story of the New Deal leaves us with a really fascinating question about how big political changes actually happen in the real world. So think about this. All of these huge, lasting reforms that we still live with, Social Security, the FDIC, were they really just a compromise? Were they the safe, moderate choice that only became possible because the threat of something much more radical was pushing from the outside? It's a powerful idea to chew on, that sometimes the political center only moves when it's getting shoved really hard from the edges. Something to think about.